about how they've overcome the challenges and pass on their knowledge about what we can do today. We have Sam Turner, the founder of Turner Strategic. She's an executive leader, coach, and entrepreneur who's led organizations in the Fortune 500, nonprofit, and small business sectors. At times, she's been the youngest person in the room or the only woman at the table. And as many of you can relate, perhaps both. Jennifer Osborne is the founder of Talent Sense Coaching. She is which is a human resources and talent management consulting firm that provides clients with solutions in recruiting, hiring, managing, and developing top performers. So an incredible two perspectives there on really how we can position ourselves and what data they're seeing in the market today. We also have with us Kate McKinley, who is a CEO, board director, and life sciences strategic advisor. Kate has a fascinating story and a superior track record in creating and leading organizations for transformation, development, regulatory, and commercial success with startup, rapid growth, turnaround, and Fortune 100 environments. And then finally, we have Valerie, who is the Director of Communications at BAE Systems. She is a certified DEI practitioner and is passionate about creating spaces where women, especially women of color, can discuss the challenges and opportunities in their careers. Valerie also is a career coach and has extensive experience in leading communication and integrated marketing plans. So we're going to jump right in, and I'm going to ask a question of the entire group to get us started. But I'm going to ask Valerie to kick us off. The question is, if you could give women on this call one piece of advice about advancing their career, what would it be and what worked for you?
Great. I just want to say thank you for including me on the panel. I'm very excited. The one piece of motivation that I used has been to know your motivation. And I've always been motivated by having experiences. And that led my entire career from college until now. If I saw something somebody was doing over there and I wanted to do it, I figured out how to get over there in order to get that experience. And so I would underscore, know your motivation and follow that.
Thanks, Val. I think that's a great piece of advice. If you want something, go get it. Now I'm going to kick it over to Jennifer.
Thanks, and thanks again for having me. Interestingly enough, I worked in corporate America for about 12 years, and my career actually didn't advance in corporate America. So I decided to quit and start my own business. So that's one way to do it, but I know that's not for everybody. So on the flip side, because of the work that I do with smaller organizations from an HR perspective, I get a front row seat to all of the promotions that happen for their employees. So when I reflected on, leaders or female leaders specifically, what I noticed is that they all present a ton of courage, a ton of confidence, and integrity, right? So you can have courage and confidence, but you might not have integrity, and that makes a huge difference. So I feel like you want to have the courage and the confidence to diplomatically, yet directly and unapologetically challenge or bring new ideas to the table, for example. But in the meantime, you also want to be known for doing the right thing when no one else is looking. So I think those are the few of the characteristics that I see the most that make some of the best leaders and have the best stories with their career development.
That's amazing. I think we could have a whole conversation about unapologetically doing the right thing. So that's so important. Kate, I'm going to turn it over to you for your thoughts.
Great. Thanks so much, Claire. And I just want to start out by thanking Jennifer and you for your vision in creating the boardroom. I'm just really excited at the relevant and valuable content that has been and is going to be shared for female professionals, and really excited to see the future of this team that you're building and participate and learn from this panel today. One piece of advice that was given to me by an incredibly accomplished CEO of a publicly traded company about 8 years ago when I was going through a career transition I think is relevant to our discussion today. And she told me this: in every role that you take, 30% of the job should be aspects you know very well. Those things you can almost do in your sleep, do very easily. Another 30% of the job should include opportunities where you know you're going to grow and you're going to learn from. And that last 30% should scare you half to death. Those aspects of the job that literally frighten you. And I had never looked at career opportunities in that way before, but ever since hearing that advice, I do quite often. And I think it is that 60% of growth, certainly that 30% that scares you, where you significantly increase your confidence. Because I think all of us are capable of so much more than we think we are. And it really is that fear, that struggle where we develop and grow. And I would also say, when I started to look at my own opportunities that way, I have a lot less aspects of jobs that scare me, because I know I'm going to jump in and really quickly hit my stride, because I've built the confidence where I've taken on experiences that I've never done before, that I don't have, the exact background. And I know that I'm going to learn, I'm going to grow and contribute and add value to any opportunity that I take on. And I've also noticed that others will sometimes say, but you've never done that job before. You've never led a project like that before. How are you going to do that? And I find myself saying, I know, isn't it great how much I'm going to learn from this new opportunity?
I think that that's something we should all be jotting down in terms of a great talking point for a really powerful response to those who may question our ability to go to the next step. But I think more importantly, I love that you're giving us a framework that we can use when assessing opportunity. The data shows that women are more likely to get jobs that they're overqualified for. So rather than us playing into that statistic, let's just bump ourselves out of it and really have our own model to succeed. That's incredible. And Samantha, turning it over to you to share what you think women should know about advancing their careers.
Well, thank you. And I'll echo everyone in how thrilled I am that this forum exists now, and that all of the women and the men who joined us too have come to this for this really important exchange. And I'll challenge everyone who's come here today is, you're going to hear a lot of good things. Choose one thing to do and do it. That is probably, the biggest thing you need to know in life is that you need to take action. Listening and learning is really important, but taking action moves you forward. And the one thing I would share as advice for everyone is, you can reinvent yourself over and over again. When I first graduated from college, I thought I had to get that right sensible job because my whole life was going to be, influenced by the decisions I made right then. Well, that's not the case. I am on career number 3 at age 57, and I'm barreling through, trying that. I'm an entrepreneur now, and it's, Jennifer, you mentioned it's not for everybody. I didn't think that was for me, but guess what? We're capable of things that we just can't imagine. So know that whatever you're doing today is not forever, doesn't have to be forever, and you can really, really be whatever you want to be.
That's amazing. And I love the idea to take one action and really carry it forward. I feel like I already have about 5. So honing in on that one is good. So Kate,
Claire, really, really quick, because we do want to mention, thank you, Lisa Hillary T, for putting a question in the chat. Anyone that has questions as we're going, please put them in the chat and we will work to address them throughout the session. But I think I'm going to ask this one now just because it is relevant in terms of what Sam just shared. Lisa was asking, how do you reinvent yourself inside the same role or the same company?
And was that question for me?
I think it's for the group,
Okay.
So how do you reinvent yourself inside the same role or the same company? Any advice there?
I'll shed some light. Okay, go ahead.
You know, I'll just jump in really quick. And I think it was Valerie that mentioned looking over and taking on a new opportunity. So I think even amongst a current role or a current organization, you can still step out and get different experiences by taking on new projects or reaching out to a different leader to get mentoring from. So I think that, you know, some of those parallel routes where you're able to step into new experiences and get additional development in your current role and organization is a great way to really show the organization that you have diverse skills that are translatable to other roles in the company.
I'd agree. I'd also add that I think it's important to figure out, you know, for the person that you report to, what's important to them, right? Like, what things can you get ahead of for the person that you report to? What things can you maybe do for them that is a thorn in their side to help make you invaluable? And though that sounds like, and even what Kate said, it sounds like, oh, that's just taking on more work. But unfortunately, sometimes getting ahead means more work, right? And I'm not saying to take on things that are outside of your profession necessarily, like more administrative in nature, but some things that are going to make you invaluable. Or even take a look at your peers that are killing it and copy from them, right? So maybe it's, you know, something that they're doing that's really impressive or getting some attention. And maybe that's not necessarily your thing, but going back to what Kate said, maybe it's something you could try and then eventually be successful at it and help make you stand out and reinvent your role.
I think that's so helpful. And Sam, I think we're going to come to you with this next question because it's related. So it makes sense that support systems grow with more responsibility and staff and admin support. And Bozeman St. Jean, she's also widely known as Boz, one of the most prolific marketers of our time, is famous for giving advice that you have to ensure that people understand the contributions that you're bringing to the table. So I think that in thinking about the last question we were at is, you know, really making sure that not only are you taking new opportunities and showing the company you can do other things, but also, do you think that it is critical that you're really emphasizing the contributions that you're making, and how loud do candidates need to be to break through to the next level with clear ownership of what they have earned? Certainly, Boz would say for her, she's all the way to the right. You have to yell from the rooftops. But what is your advice based on your work with other candidates?
You know, you always need to be at a moment's notice ready to tell your story. And your story is the value that you add. So, and you never know when you're going to run into the opportunity to tell that story. And Jen, you used the phrase earlier, I think, and it's escaping me now, but don't be shy about it. You know, and I'm sure you've seen people in your life who you've always thought, geez, they're always tooting their own horn. But guess what? Where are they at? They are probably where you'd like to be. Now, you need to do it in your own style, in your own comfortable way. You know, be true to yourself, be authentic. But the critical thing is know your value. So spend some time thinking about that. Look at what you've achieved, what you've accomplished. You know, what do you get asked to do by, you know, the leaders in your organization because they know you're going to get that done. You know, look at your last performance reviews. And what did they say? You know, what were your high point areas? Where were you a high performer? Those are the areas where you can clearly demonstrate value. And then be ready at all times. Practice this in front of a mirror with your partner and talk about it, because you want to have that in your body because we're not used to talking about it yourselves. You know, right now I'm marketing myself as a business when I've spent 30 years marketing other organizations, and I'm still figuring out how to do it. It's really uncomfortable. So, you know, work on it, practice it, get it in your body, and never be afraid to talk about the value you add.
Yeah, and Val, I see you shaking your head too. Do you agree with this? And really, what do you think that women should be thinking about as they try to advance to the next level?
Yeah, I mean, I will say that just for me personally, being a champion of my own experiences and telling my story, I still struggle with that. You know, part of that how you grow up thing, right? And if you didn't toot your own horn, and it's hard to shift and do that in your company. And that's why I was shaking my head, because yes, we definitely need to do that. I still need to do that. I should have done that like yesterday, right? Because it's still the thing that I'm still struggling with, right? It's the thing that I know that is going to help me advance my career. So the sooner you can get comfortable with telling your story, the better your opportunities are going to be. And so I have two daughters, 21 and 23, and they're in college, one in graduate school and the other in undergrad. And I tell them all the time, which is the strongest organ in your whole body is your mouth. You got to use it. You got to tell your story, right? You got to advocate for yourself. Don't wait for other people to do it for you. And so that's why I was giving that positive nod. We've got to embrace it, and we don't have to feel like we're, I think, portraying ourselves in the midst of telling that story. I think often women are used to kind of sitting against the wall and waiting for others, and so you're doing everything that you should be doing to elevate yourself and cast a positive spotlight on who you are and your contributions.
I love that, and I feel like
Claire. I'm a big advocate of turning thought into action, because action is what moves you forward. And I'll challenge us, because we're not good at telling our story. I would challenge you all to now commit to once a week telling your story to somebody who matters in your network. And it doesn't have to be a big story, just one thing you accomplished or what you did in that last job. And once you start doing that once a week, start practice doing that once a day. But just now, once a week.
No, I think that's great advice. And I was just thinking through, Jennifer, too, one question for you. I think we talk a lot about 30, 60, 90-day plans when you get a new job. Is there anything that we could take from that mental framework and think about this, maybe in terms of tooting our own horns, or maybe said in a different way, in terms of making it really clear the value that we're personally bringing to an organization?
Yeah, so I think from an employee's perspective, in terms of 30, 60, 90-day plans, I mean, hopefully your employer has them set up for you. And if not, it's okay to ask for them, right? So I'm not saying you need to demand a 30, 60, and 90-day check-in, but at least requesting some type of regular check-ins to see how things are going within your first 90 days. And that goes for new hires as well as people who are newly promoted, right? So any type of new role. And I think this is something I want to add to my answer to the question before about reinventing your role, which ties into having a successful onboarding plan, asking your manager. So going back to your manager and saying, like, you know, how am I doing? What can I do better? What do you like most about what I do? I'm interested in XYZ in the next 90 days. What are your thoughts about that? I think that in general, women often shy away from, you know, asking questions like that. And I think employees in general, regardless of gender, sometimes are nervous about putting themselves out there and like asking their manager what they can do better, and wait for their manager to come to them with the feedback and come to them with what their annual salary increase would be. And instead, the employee should have some ownership in all of that, to make sure that they're staying on track and there's consistent feedback between both the manager and employee to make sure you know that you're on track and what it's going to take to get you to the next level.
That's really good feedback. And as I think about that feedback, I think let's shift into a different space about moments where you all have taken really big risks and examples in your own career and how you've really seen that pay off. So, Kate, you've had a very impressive career trajectory. I think we could start with you here. Can you talk a little bit about how you thought about breaking through some of those risks that you alluded to in the beginning, and maybe a specific story or two about how you navigated the journey?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. And, you know, I love this topic of risk, because I think my first response is, I'm not sure if I've ever taken a risk in my career. And I think that is my initial reaction, because I never looked at career development or taking steps in my career as something risky or a chance to lose something of value. I only really saw and continue to see the benefit, the benefit of taking on new roles and more responsibility. And I think I've gained so much more than I've lost in taking on those so-called risks. I think with every advancement, every new role, I was pushed outside of my comfort zone. I spoke a little bit earlier about, sort of the fear that drives you to really grow. I think I've been able to be more creative and think differently. And, by myself being empowered, I was able to provide opportunities to empower and develop others. And I think through that process of taking on those so-called risks, I've been able to build a brand and become known for being a visionary leader that builds high-performing teams, that exceeds expectations and results. And I think that growth that we've been talking about has helped me immensely, both professionally and personally. So I think, my advice to the group when we talk about risks and making moves in your career is not to view it as a chance to lose something, that you're leaving something behind, but that you're moving towards an opportunity to grow and gain something. You're going to gain so many skills and experiences that differentiate you. I think Valerie was talking about, looking for your unique value. And I think through these so-called risks that you take in your career, you're going to build that unique value that you're going to take with you to future teams and organizations that you work with.
I love that. Let's take risk out of the vernacular in terms of how we think about opportunity. And I'll open it up to Jennifer, Valerie, Samantha. Anything you want to add here?
I would add that I love that spin, Kate, on not even a spin, it's just the approach of instead of it being a risk, it's an opportunity and you assessing your skills and abilities to make it work, right? And I'm going to assume that you have courage and confidence based on what I've gathered today, which is awesome. And maybe there's people on the call that have that or don't. And for those that still think that that's like, whoa, that's a big step. Another way to go about it is, coming up with all like a list of pros and cons, right? Like a list of what I think I'm good at with this job and what I don't think I'm so good at with this job, and all the things you're not so good at, talking to maybe the hiring manager, if you're at that point in the interview process, to figure out what it's going to take for you to feel like you have the confidence or that you're capable of doing those things that you're not sure about. Because you also don't want to set yourself up for failure, right? Like it can't be too far of a stretch, and you want to make sure that your manager is on the same page as you, so that way when you take those things on, that there's actually some kind of a plan, so that way you're successful with it.
Claire, I'd like to add something to the conversation. Different from a career risk, but a risk you take in your career, and that is being your true self. And I can think about my career and always feeling like I was tap dancing for whatever the hiring manager or for the company, trying to be who I thought they needed me to be for that particular job. And I spent many, many years doing that, and I lost myself in that process. And so when I got laid off from a job, I didn't know who I was because I had been performing for the promotion, performing for the opportunity. And so when I interviewed at BAE Systems, I decided that I was going to truly be my authentic self, that whoever walked into the room, whomever I was in that moment, I was going to be my true self. And if they wanted to hire me based on that, great. And if they didn't, I needed to move on because I had wasted way too many years trying to be somebody else. And so I think the risk to be who you are is one that we often feel we can take. Some of us feel we can't take for whatever reason. And I would say take the risk to be yourself, and the right opportunity will find you, and you'll get to be who you are every day. And so I just wanted to offer a different perspective on a career risk.
Yeah, and I've got to self-disclose here that Valerie and I work in the same company. And I think what's so powerful about what you just said is by you blazing that trail and doing that, that made it much easier for me when I joined the organization to be my authentic self, right? And then dominoes start to fall all over the room. So in so many ways, and I just see everybody shaking this head, right? To step up and be yourself can have such a greater impact than you may ever imagine. And I'm just going to pause here and see if there's any questions in the chat.
We don't have any questions in the chat at the moment, but from everyone that's participating in the call, please feel free to add any questions for the whole panel, for specific participants. Certainly, we're going to keep this going with the questions that we prepare, but would love to hear from you all and what is that burning question that you really want to ask of the group here.
And I'll go back to a question that was asked last time because, and we'll go back to you, Valerie. So Valerie is a certified DEI practitioner, and a really important question came up last call. Is there different advice for women of color about advancing to the next level? And here at the Boardroom, our goal is to be inclusive of all environments, and we would say, yes, it is different for different groups. So Valerie, do you have any advice speaking to that topic and thoughts that additional things or challenges that women of color should be thinking about as they approach to advance to the next level?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I would say there are definitely different advice. And probably when I kind of share the story, there will be people across identity groups that are going to shake their heads and say, well, yes, I feel the same way. I think one of the things as a Black woman, I've been told from parents and other professional peers that I need to be twice as good. So I have to have twice as more education, twice, the number of skills, twice the, amount of experience to get the job, right? So that twice as good as kind of thing adds a lot of pressure to you. Because you can't compete just based on what everyone else would say is a stellar career. And so one is, I think that is true. We have to be twice as good as the next candidate. But I would also say when you're checking the boxes for that company and saying, I have these skills and I have this background, I have this education certification, you also have to have your own personal professional box that you're checking against that company, right? So can I be myself every day? Can I check that box, right? I tell my daughters, authenticity is a superpower. So make sure you bring that cape in with you every day. Will the environment support me and allow me to be the best that I can be? What are the non-negotiables for me? And so I think a lot of times the twice as good as filter, we really focus in on the company and maybe forget to focus in on what we need in order to be successful. I will say the other thing, which is probably true for all of us, is you have to have an incredible support group, I think, as a woman of color, because every day you face some kind of, I can't believe my colleague just said that, or some microaggression in a meeting. And, you sit there quietly and patiently, and maybe you say something or maybe you don't. But if you have years of doing this in a career, there's a point where when you felt more than qualified, now you may feel like you're an imposter or you're underqualified because of what's happening to you every day, and others are not, standing up and supporting you, and you may be the only Black woman or Black person in a room or a person of color, and it's hard and you don't know who to go to. So that support system is incredibly important. You have to have people who are like-minded, have similar experiences, who can lift you up, give you perspective, dust you off, and say, go back in there, girl, you can do it. And so I think there are differences and similarities. Probably the differences for a lot of us may be just is race, right? Because I think for women, we have some of the same kinds of things. But then I think for women of color, there's one more layer that we have to filter a lot of what we experience through. So we filter it as women and we filter it as whatever other identity group. So for me as an African American woman, so it is different. I hope that some of the things that I shared are, are helpful for people. I will say for myself, I've loved every aspect of my career, but there's a lot of scars that I bear because of it. So it's a kind of a bittersweet, experience.
Yeah, which is so challenging to hear, right? And I think that one of the things that you said reminded me of something that I learned about it this year. It was a new thing for me, but this concept of a board of directors. How can you choose a trusted board of advisor, a group of women or men, both, that you go to and you can ask a question about how would they navigate this? How would they do this? So can we learn from other scars more quickly? And then also, I continue to be struck, how can we be a board of directors for others and help either advance them faster or help them see something that is certainly a myth, or even as simple as amplifying them in a room. So thank you, Val. I think all of that was so powerful.
Thank you.
And I can pause here if anyone has other questions, or I do have a question for Kate about work-life balance. So Kate, I'll swing over to you. So I think that we had a conversation last week that just resonated and stayed with me. I had not thought about this before, so I hope that it may impact other women as well. But it's human nature to think that the next level will be more work, more responsibilities. How can I possibly take on one more thing? Can you share with the group how you've navigated this concept and what advice you may have after having hit that next level, and what it feels like, what you wish you had known before?
Absolutely. And I think we said earlier, there are certain topics we could do a whole session on, and I think this is one. I think the concept of work-life balance and what that really means, particularly for female leaders, is something I've thought a lot about in my career. It's really weighed on me both personally and as I mentor other women. And one thing that I've noticed that at some point in a woman's career, and I think it's different for every woman, but we quite frequently see she stops raising her hand for that next opportunity or that next big project. And when I discuss that with women, it's rarely, almost never, because she doesn't think she has the ability, but it's typically because of her responsibilities outside of work, which for many women are quite significant. And I've certainly had those concerns throughout my career at different points with different things going on in my personal life. And I've definitely not always raised my hand, but many times I have raised my hand. And I also thought it was a great conversation that Claire and I had several weeks ago. And I shared with her that when I was approached for a role to lead a 250-person organization, I was 10 months pregnant. Now, obviously, my company knew at that point I was pregnant, and they clearly weren't concerned because I was approached for the role, but I sure was. And I will always remember the conversation I had with my husband where I said, "Oh, I'm really honored they thought of me for this role, but there could not be a worse time in my life and a worse time to take on a job like this." And in my mind, it was over. It was, not happening. And my husband said back to me, "Or it could be the best time to take on this role." And I've definitely joked with him many times over the past 8 years, you probably regret making that comment, because that set off a whole trajectory of different moves and really positive advancements for my career. But with his encouragement and the encouragement of many, I took on that role. And a lot of comments that I've already heard have really resonated and reminded me of this experience, because it was really the first time that I felt I had an opportunity to do some negotiation. And I was able to negotiate extra maternity leave and negotiate other parameters that were going to fit into my new life as a working mother. And in also taking on that new, what felt like a really big job at the time, I learned something else. And I really saw that as you escalate in an organization, everyone fears that you're going to continue the job you're doing and take on additional work. And frequently, what really happens is the work shifts. So someone's going to take on your previous role, and likely you're going to be guiding and mentoring that person. But you also likely have additional resources to assist you. Perhaps it's an administrative assistant or a larger team, or certainly more support as you are going to be involved in making more significant decisions. And the stakes are higher as you escalate in an organization. So it's not to minimize that taking on bigger role doesn't have an impact, but certainly to your personal life. But I think there's an opportunity when we have these moments to take on that next step that feels really big, to clarify expectations, to carve out ways of working that work well for you. I hear a theme of showing up and being your authentic self, and really differentiating and charting a new path that we know positively impacts others as well. And, the final point I would make here is, depending on the role you're taking on, you may now have an opportunity to have a seat at the table when decisions are being made that impact the workplace, or at least be in a position where you can influence the decision makers more directly. And when I took on that larger role while caring for a newborn, I had an opportunity to eliminate certain travel and traveling on Sundays, and coming home late at night. I was able, and this was all pre-COVID, but we started shifting live meetings to virtual meetings. And that minimized the impact of travel to my team and also their families. And then fast forward to the early days of COVID, where I was the only female in the C-suite. And I was able to advocate for the whole company to ensure that there were policies and ways of working to support families and parents that had remote work and remote school, which not everyone in the C-suite could bring that perspective. So it's a topic, as you can tell, I'm really passionate about, because I believe as we continue to advance women, as we continue to advance individuals that bring diverse backgrounds and perspectives, we're already, and we're certainly going to continue to radically impact the workplace, which has a direct impact in the home life for so many families and those future generations that Claire spoke about, that we have an opportunity to chart a new path for. So thanks for the opportunity, Claire, to share a little more about something I'm passionate about, and have some, I think, unique, maybe not so unique experiences to share with the group.
No, thank you, Kate. That story just left such a mark on me, and I think it is profound. How can you take your power back? And I'm going to transition it over to Jen. I know that she has some questions that she's going to take over and ask from here as well.
Yeah, so Rachel asked the question about, as a woman in business, like, how do you balance home and family life, which I know Kate just touched on. And, how are you doing that, I guess, while still excelling in your career and moving up in your career, which, just as a quick plug, I'll share at the end, this is actually the topic of our next session, but definitely, which I'll share more at the end, but definitely want to hear from the panelists, because everyone has a different perspective on this. So how do you balance work life, and how do you balance that with moving up in your career? Jen, you're on mute.
Gosh, I was that girl today. I actually have two very close friends that were both recently promoted. Jen, you might be aware of at least one of them. And one, she's now the Chief Human Resources Officer at an organization, and she couldn't be happier. And her job before left her extremely stressed out. She's got 3 children. One is very young, the other in middle school. And she's killing it and living her best life with complete work-life balance, because she works for a company that respects work-life balance and that family comes first. Whereas before, she didn't have that situation. She was completely stressed and was scared to make that leap of faith because there was so much unknown, and she had something familiar where she was before. So she called me and I was like, take the leap. And here she is now killing it. I have another friend who is now on her second promotion within the last few years. And though like sometimes we think if we get a promotion or we take on a new job, it's more responsibility. It's not necessarily more, it's just different. And it's a matter of, you know, if it's about managing people, sure, like that's something like, are you really ready to do that? Because there's a ton of unknown with that. But sometimes it's just a shift of work. So in this case, this person was managing people in her last role. And they were individual contributors, and now she's going to be managing supervisors. So that's different type of managing, right? It's maybe not as much hand-holding and a different type of work. So I just wanted to add those couple of things, and it sounds like there's going to be a whole other session on this, but I thought it was relevant to what we were talking about.
And Sam, just as some background, I've actually known Sam for at least 20 years. I've always looked up to Sam. She was one of my first clients when I entered the agency world. And I always thought she was just, I mean, because again, she was a woman in the workplace in a leadership role, and have kind of followed her life. And I've always been so amazed at the fact that Sam is willing to take risks, right? And I know we had this conversation today. We shouldn't look at them as risks. We should look at them as opportunities. But I personally am not much of a risk taker. I know I need to get better at that. But Sam, do you mind sharing your story, your personal story in terms of you know, your work and going to New York and coming back to Phoenix? I think it's an amazing story, and to remind people to follow their passion.
Yeah, sure. And I'll preface my story with, you don't have to go big to take risks either. I mean, my story may sound a little big, and that's not what everybody needs to do. But so I had a wonderful, wonderful career of 20 some years in the Fortune 500-ish marketing world. And it was, I loved it. It was great. But I got to a point in 2010, and I was just, it doesn't do it for me anymore. I need something more. And I couldn't quite say what that was, but I got some advice, or I got a mentor, or a coach, actually would be a better word, to kind of help me think that through. And ultimately that ended in me deciding to quit my 6-figure job, sell all my things, put my house up for rent, and move to New York City and go study musical theater for a year during the sabbatical. Now, and trust me, I didn't do this when I was a kid. I played musical instruments, but I spent a year you know, doing singing, acting, and dancing with like 19 and 20 somethings, and I was in my mid 40s. So talk about fear. That was the scariest time of my life. Actually, the bigger scary thing is I did not know this, that a business person, the way I've been taught everyone is you know, keep your cards, you know, close to your vest, never let them see you sweat, kind of have a veneer of something, a mask. And when I went to do this training to be an artist, I realized, I didn't know this is what it meant to train to be an artist, but it's all about being vulnerable and open. And that was terrifying to me at that point in my life. But it was the best training I ever got, and helped me grow as a leader. I am an immensely better leader, having learned and gotten comfortable being vulnerable and open and failing. Because when you are in the, you know, the acting space, you rehearse every day, and every day a rehearsal is a failure. Oh, I didn't do that the way I wanted it to do every day, and you only get better by failing. I have this little book right here by my side. I don't know if you can read it, but Try Again and Fail Better. And that's the thing, is there's no such thing really as failure. You know, I don't know if anyone here works in the packaged goods space, like Procter & Gamble type companies, but they want 50% of their products to fail, because that's how they learn and grow, figure things out. So, you know, the only failure is to not try again. I'm kind of going off on a rant and all this, but anyway, the one thing I knew going into that, I really didn't think that I was going to go become a musical theater maven, but I figured old life and new life would come together, and it did. And I ended up ultimately running a ballet company, professional ballet company here in Phoenix. So, you know, a lot of people said to me, "Oh, you're so courageous to go off and do that." You know, it wasn't so courageous. I was desperate for change. I just couldn't, you know, I needed to do something different. And I would say to you all is, don't let yourself get that far down the path that you feel desperate to make a change, because you don't necessarily want to quit your job and run off to the circus, as I call it. You know, go for it, you know, because I survived it. But, just be aware that, if you feel you need to make a change, do it. And following up on something that Kate said earlier, particularly when she was in a position to take on this new role, is ask for what you want. As simple as that. Don't think about it as a confrontation. Just ask. I would like to have this. More often than not, you're going to get it, or something like that. We think so much about, wanting something is becoming a confrontation. But, and those of you who've been managers of people, when someone comes to you and asks you for something, more often than not, you want to find a way to give it to them if you can. So it's not that you want to say no. So just keep that in mind. And Jen, I don't know if I proved the point that you wanted, or I put the pin in it that you want, but
yeah, that was awesome. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that story, Sam. So this question is from Becca, and I think Val, you would be great to answer this because you talked about, right, your superpower is your authenticity. And with so much of the workforce being remote at the moment, like how can you still make sure you're showing up as your authentic self while working remote and working with remote teammates?
That is a good question. I think for me, it is COVID required a shift in how I lead. I'm a manager. And I was a manager that believed in a little bit of distance between myself and my direct reports. The authentic me, because of COVID, wanted to embrace them because it was something we were all going through, the uncertainty of the pandemic, the fear of the pandemic. And so I just decided that I was going to approach being a leader with humanity and, taking time to talk about what we were feeling about, what we were going through individually or collectively with our families. And so I think for me, being authentic in that with COVID was about being human and using that humanity as the filter, right? And then I think the other part is listening, and because now we're all in Zoom, right? And really being fully present and listening and finding those moments to share a perspective or point of view and it's being vulnerable, Sam, like you said, being vulnerable and speaking a truth that maybe I would not have spoken in a room full of people, but using the fact that we're all sitting in our homes as feeling a little bit more empowered to show up and be vulnerable. And so I think using humanity and being comfortable with vulnerability, for me, were the ways that I could show up being more authentic.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That is so true in terms of, we do feel like we can take a little bit of our shell off at home, which has been a positive, I think, in terms of some of the effects of COVID. And I just want to ask Jen a question and for her to share her experience. She was part of a team recently. She's in the Cleveland marketplace and helped hire in a suburb of Cleveland the first female fire chief, which I think is just fascinating and so exciting. And Jen, can you tell us a little bit about that story, about the search, about what you found along the way?
Yeah, for sure. And one more thing I just want to add to, like, completely support asking for it, right? But there's also this sense with managers lately, especially since the pandemic, of this like perceived sense of entitlement with employees. So a lot of people are asking for it right now, right? So this is like, there's an art to this, right? Like, so yes, have the courage to ask for it, but also being mindful about the frequency and the practicality or the realistic nature of the person being able to produce whatever that is. So I just wanted to add that. Hopefully that's not confusing. Like, ask for it, but don't. Yes. So actually I have a client in the greater Cleveland area who's a municipality, and they're in Cuyahoga County, and they successfully hired the first female chief officer, fire chief, excuse me, for the organization in the history of Cuyahoga County, which is really great. It made the news and we were super proud of it. And I think like the reasoning behind it is because the mayor of that particular town is all about making sure that it's a safe place to hire people, make people comfortable, and it doesn't matter about, you know, whether you are, whatever your gender is or race or religion or whatever background it is, it's more about, are you qualified to do the position? And therefore it makes you a qualified candidate, and set up the rest of his leadership team to support that as well. And now she's on the road to success. So it was a great accomplishment. We're super proud of it, especially in these times today.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And Dita, is that how you say your name? I hope I'm saying that correctly.
It's Dieta.
Dieta. So Dieta, do you want to share your comment? I think it's a really interesting one for the group to see.
Oh, sure. So I have a daughter who just graduated from college this past June. And so starting in the spring, she was going through the job interview process, you know, putting herself out there. And then kind of her first time interviewing for like a real life job. She had done some internships and that type of thing. And she was very hesitant to have these conversations where it was actually time for, you know, to talk about the offer. She was hesitant even to ask questions about the offer, not just about negotiating a number but just say, okay, what's your vacation time? You know, what do you get in terms of medical benefits? And she was like, oh, you know, it doesn't really matter because it's my first job and I'm going to take it no matter what. And so I was having all these conversations with her about, you know, you have to ask these questions. They're not going to send you storming out of the room. You know, no, how dare you ask that? You're asking reasonable questions. And even when you are talking salary, you know, it's a conversation. It's not an ultimatum, but you have to be willing to have that conversation. And so she did, and she ended up, you know, getting some great offers, and she ended up negotiating for some higher salaries and asking about vacation. But then I find myself, when going through the process, I just started a new job actually a month ago. So I was going through the interviewing process and that type of stuff. And I'm like, oh, I didn't ask about this, or I really should have asked about that. And I said, wait a minute. I tell my daughter to ask these questions. So why do I hesitate, you know, in the room to ask the questions? And of course, you know, I have more experience and I'm comfortable doing it in a large way, but also it's just nature, I think, in some sense, you know, how we've been brought up and socialized that I just, oh no, it's fine. You know, I like what they've said anyway, so I'm just going to accept whatever it is. And so I find myself really saying, wait a minute, if I would tell my daughter to ask the question, I should ask the question. So just in a little bit different perspective.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for sharing that wonderful, wonderful story and great advice that you were then saying to yourself, I should take the same advice, right, that I'm giving. So, so we are nearing the end of our time here. We want to be very careful not to go over because I know people have meetings following this, but thank you so much to this amazing panel of professionals. I was so excited that we were able to bring this together for the team on the meeting today. And I know like Jen and Val and Sam and Kate are kind of putting their LinkedIn profiles in the chat. So please feel free to follow each other. And two quick things. I want to challenge the group. Sam mentioned, you know, it's all about taking action. And she gave the challenge for everyone to, you know, build their story and practice that every week, and then eventually practice that every day. And we would love to hear your stories. So on the Boardroom, LinkedIn is our platform right now as we're getting started. And so if you can share with the group through the Boardroom, whether, you know, messaging us directly and we can share that, Claire and I can share our contact information, but we would love to hear your stories. I think this would be a great first step to crafting your story and sharing that with the group. And maybe down the road a little bit, we can maybe break off into smaller groups and practice sharing our stories. I think that would be a great exercise. So I want to challenge everyone to share their story with us as kind of that first action step that Sam challenged us to. And then secondarily, just quickly, I know I touched on this, our next meeting is November 30th, which is a Wednesday at noon, same time. And if anybody wants me or us to send them the link directly instead of having to register for the event, please just put your email in the chat and we'll just add you to the invite, and you won't have to sign up or look for it to follow it. We have another amazing speaker. Her name is Caroline Kinston. She is the Chief People Officer at SureScripts in the DC market, which is a tech company in the healthcare space. And she's actually going to be sharing her story of how she accomplished a work-life balance while working up the corporate ladder. She found herself very burnt out, very resentful, and she came up with a way, kind of this whole refueling for life philosophy that helped her move on to that next step. And in fact, she had a child just a couple years ago, later in life, and so she can share her story about how she overcame that feeling of feeling very run down. And so hope you all join us for that on November 30th at noon. Thanks again. Please follow us on LinkedIn. Again, that's our main platform. So glad to see all these faces, and thank you again to this amazing panel today.
Thank you, everyone.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye guys.